Hello, and welcome to I Hate Talking, a podcast about talking, including etymology, frustrating topics, current events, and other random subjects. I'm Adam.
And I'm Steph. We are married, and we invite you into these discussions with us as we talk about the good and the bad of talking.
We hope you enjoy today's episode. Welcome to episode 24 of I Hate Talking.
Hi, everyone.
So today's word or phrase of the episode comes in response of a few words that were used in a recent Joe Rogan episode. This one in particular with Louis Elizondo. And during that interview at around 1 hour, 15 minutes, and 47 seconds, the guest, Louis Elizondo, was describing how he used some different words to normalize or just show that people don't necessarily think of something in a quote-unquote normal way when they hear the word paranormal. And the example that he gave was parachute as one of the examples, along with paramedic. So we will be talking about the word para as a root word.
Excellent.
So the thing that he was using is somewhat correct. Para does come from the Greek word para, which means beside or alongside of. I actually think he said Latin, but it does come from the Greek, actually. So didn't get that quite accurate, but at least knew that it was one of the two that we get our normal root words from in terms of Latin or Greek. And he did describe that correctly in terms of its definition, beside or alongside of. However, his example word parachute does not actually use that root word. It's actually a different root word for para. So, and there is actually also a Latin root word paro, which means to prepare. So that would be a little bit different. So the word parachute actually comes from the Italian word parere, which means to avert, defend, resist, guard, shield, or shroud, and chute, which comes from meaning of, in French, to fall. So parachute came to mean from that it was protecting against falling. So the word parachute does not, in fact, use any particular Greek or Latin roots.
I'm reading this one article, and they're saying para is, there's two different roots here people can use. You have the Greek para, which means beside or alongside. Then you have the Latin root, which means to shield against. So if he's partially right, parachute could be shielding against something, right? For Latin. Possibly in the Latin would make sense because it's shielding against, right?
And that may be true. However, the parachute was actually invented by somebody in that area of France, Italy. And this gentleman named Lenormand was actually coined the word because he used both the Italian and French root words. So maybe true. And we're finding that, as in previous episodes, that we find a lot of interesting things as we look at the evolution of words. But this is pretty well documented that this gentleman coined that term using the Italian and French languages that he would have actually known. Now, Louis, as I was saying, was correct in using the term paramedic in terms of that person having a medical profession that is beside or alongside of a full medical practitioner. So paramedic being a correct usage of that, but again, would have been the Greek root word, not Latin. And then he does explain that when people are thinking of that paramedic in terms of normal everyday usage, that when you use the word paranormal, that does not have normal everyday usage in terms of being just something that you refer to in reality as something that is necessarily actually there. It's more used as something that you would write off as not real. But I think his point being that paramedic is a real thing, and thus paranormal is a real thing because it is just normal adjacent.
Mm-hmm. I get his point. It makes sense. Usually when people use the word paranormal, you are thinking of sci-fi or stories or something that's not mainstream believed, right?
Right, or sci-fi, which is short for science fiction. So again, not in actual reality.
Mm-hmm.
So we are going to be talking about some things that may or may not be true in this particular episode, since we have just had the anniversary of September 11th. As this episode is, you're listening to it on September 12th or sometime after that. We are going to be talking about the events of September 11th, 2001, which was, at this point, 23 long years ago.
Wow.
And we did mention, I think, in one of our previous episodes when we were talking about just some of the numbers of people that have died in various wars or global events, such as those on 9/11, that we did talk about how there are some people that weren't born at that time, so don't have any particular recollection of the events as they unfolded on that day. And those that are voting would not even have potentially
Right.
lived through those events.
Yeah.
So we did also allude to the fact of World Trade Center building number 7
Mm-hmm.
falling on that day. But were you even aware that that happened?
Well, I was not aware until you told me. So no, I was on the younger side when the actual events came down. I didn't necessarily follow the news like that in my teen years.
We did know the Twin Towers fell.
Yeah, okay, well, to show my naivety, I still vividly remember that day and hearing, I was on the West Coast, so very far away from it, and I heard that the World Trade Towers fell, the two, and then while I was at school, I heard that the Twin Towers fell. And so I was like, oh no, 4 towers fell? So high school version of me is not the best person to be asking about this because I thought they were separate towers. I did not know they had different names, like a nickname. As I grew and got older, and learned about it, I still did not know about Tower 7 until you told me. And I think in the beginning, I definitely rolled my eyes at your theories.
Precisely. And then there was also the Pentagon that was struck.
Mm-hmm.
And another plane that crashed in a field in Pennsylvania that was destined for most likely some other area. I think the theory was that that was destined for the White House.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that was it, right? Those 4
Right.
planes.
Yeah.
So the thing that led me to do more research on this was Building 7, because there was another tower that fell that was not struck by anything other than some falling debris from the first 2 towers. And then it did have some, I guess, fire inside of it. And according to the NIST report that was done several years later, the debris from the other buildings actually did not involve in any way the structural collapse of that Building 7. And it was attributed due to just the office fire, but some other strange, suspicious things that were going on with that particular building and just the events in general around September 11th.
Okay, so what was Building 7?
So Building 7, and we did discuss doing more of a fact-based episode today, and decided against that. We're just really going to do this as an impromptu thing. So I'm just going off of what is in my memory and maybe a quick little offline research here and there. But Building 7 was just another building within the World Trade Center complex. And I believe there were a number of financial records that were stored there that would have been destroyed. And that is the main thing that I remember around Building 7.
And it was a much smaller building, right?
Yes, it was much smaller. It was, I think, only a fraction of the total height of the towers 1 and 2.
How were there other buildings? If this is building 7, I'm assuming that means that there were at least 7 buildings, if not more, right?
Yep, there would have been a whole number of buildings as part of the World Trade Center complex, and that is just happens to be number 7 in however they named their buildings. And that does in some way reference to, I think, one of the potential reasons that there would be some sort of conspiracy theory about September 11th, which is just financial records and finances in general. There is actually a report on September 10th that was about how there was a large amount of money missing from some government funds and accounting that was announced on September 10th.
There were 7 World Trade Center buildings. And plus in that complex, there was like a church and a few other things like that, like a plaza. Obviously, the 2 Twin Towers, as we know them, were the really tall ones, the ones that the planes hit, and where so much devastation and life was lost. But the other World Trade Towers around it were still significantly large, just not in comparison. But if they were here in our town, they would definitely stand out. And they also were destroyed.
Yeah, there's a key difference in the fact that towers 1 and 2 collapsed, as well as building 7 collapsed. The other buildings, as well as other buildings outside of the World Trade Center complex, like I believe the Deutsche Bank had a very large building that was next block over and had heavy damage. The key difference here is that they were destroyed, meaning that they were essentially totaled. They could not be rebuilt. Mm-hmm. But only buildings 1, 2, and 7 collapsed within their own footprint.
Mm-hmm. Right. That would make more sense that those 3 were the ones that completely were. The others were still standing mostly.
So obviously they needed to be torn down because they were beyond recovery. But the key difference here is that those 3 buildings collapsed and only 2 of them were struck by a particular object.
So, yeah, your question then is, why did the other towers get damaged and not collapse? And why did this one collapse?
Precisely. Just some things to make you think. And as I was saying, there was the report on September 10th. The quote here was from Rumsfeld. He said, "Our financial systems are decades old. According to some estimates, we cannot track 2.3 trillion in transactions. We cannot share information from floor to floor in this building because it's stored on dozens of technological systems that are inaccessible or incompatible." So again, not necessarily saying that it's missing per se, which is a correction to what I mentioned earlier, but basically could not track those records. And then the September 11th attacks happened the following day.
Okay.
There's also a lot of interesting things surrounding the stock market. There was a number of transactions that were very large in nature that were shorting the airlines. So if you're shorting a stock, you're betting against it. Basically, you are expecting it to move downward in a very volatile fashion. So there's a lot of shorting of the airline stocks immediately before this particular event as well.
Okay, so with all that interesting things going on that the general public might not be aware of at that time, what do you think that means?
So I think that means that there were people that had pre-existing knowledge that this was going to happen. Now, the conspiracy theory is that it was perhaps people that were actually conducting the plot, and I think that is true. I guess the conspiracy theory is whether you think that there was upper executives within the American government that were part of this, or if it was the official narrative where it was Al-Qaeda and terrorists of some kind.
I think I have a really hard time. Like, I can feel myself. I don't know if y'all listeners can too or not, but like I can feel myself get frustrated because there were so many people that died. So I don't want to believe that narrative, because there are just too many lives, and lives are worth way more value than money.
To us, they are, but to somebody that would not really care too much about human life that is not necessarily related to them, perhaps not.
I guess. I mean, it's either somebody cares more about money or someone cares more about their religion, right? That would be the two narratives that we're holding up as options at this moment, right?
That is, according to the Bible, the two that you can serve, God or money.
But when I said when I talked religion, I meant the scenario I was told by the media was that it was radicals that believed a certain religion, and they were doing this in the name of their religion. Not every Muslim would believe that and take those actions, obviously, but these were radicals that took these actions in the name of their religion.
Indeed. So, yeah, I guess if you take the side of the conspiracy theory, there would still need to be some sort of explanation. And that could be just the explanation that they served, because there were potentially other reasons that they would have a vested interest in doing something like this, aside from the financial impact. And that would be to install more surveillance and government apparatus, such as the Patriot Act, as well as go to war in an area that is known for its cocaine production capability.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just thinking in real time here. How wrong is it? Say some people have a really good heads up that something bad's gonna happen. This is gonna happen. They know they can't stop it because they know they can't stop it. Is it wrong for them to monetize and maybe move all, like you said, short the airlines and do all these things, knowing that they can't stop it, so they might as well benefit?
Possibly, which does bring us to another particular interesting person in relation to the events on September 11th, and that is Larry Silverstein. He is the owner, essentially, of the World Trade Center complex at that particular time. He had bought the buildings just a few months before, had insured them for far more money than they were worth, and according to a lot of reports, actually had a very specific itinerary that he did each day and had breakfast every single business day in that building, but just happened to not be there, according to most reports, because he had a doctor's appointment that day, and that was basically interesting that he was not there and had all that particular personal interest in something like that actually happening. And according to some things that I've read, I've also seen where he claimed to insurance claims because it was two separate acts of terrorism, and wanted to get paid double.
And where is he now?
So I believe he's like 97 years old or something like that, and still alive, I believe, but not necessarily in the public eye at that particular age. 93 years old is his age currently, and his net worth, according to Forbes, is $1 billion.
And what does he say? Has he publicly defended himself on any of this?
Not that I've seen. I don't see, according to anything that I've read, where he would neither confirm nor deny any of these particular accusations. Now, I have seen some reports where he does say that this was like a planned medical appointment, but that's about it.
Right. So either he's just the world's luckiest guy.
And that actually is his nickname, according to conspiracy theorists, is Lucky Larry.
Oh, I like that.
We've been talking about the New York side of things. There was also the some oddities around just the Pennsylvania plane as well as the Pentagon plane. For example, I think that There was a number of phone calls that were made from people on the planes to loved ones that have some um, potentially strange anomalies, just in terms of there not being any background noise, as well as them being, for all intents and purposes, calm compared to maybe what some would expect them to be in terms of their frantic or not frantic temperament. And then also one particular call that I have not listened to in a very long time, but I seem to recall that that particular woman said that it was quote unquote a frame, and then the call ended after that.
What would you mean by that?
That it was like a setup, that they framed this event, and that it was not a real occurrence.
Hmm. But these people really did lose their lives, though, right?
I believe so. There are some, I think, people on the further fringe of the spectrum on conspiracy theory that believe that they would have been either on a different plane or were somehow part of this. But I do not think that's the case. I think that perhaps they do that to maybe explain away what you were saying in terms of if this is a true event and people are basically sacrificing people's lives to accomplish their end, is that they don't really want to believe that the people would be that evil.
Right.
But they're, I think, in my opinion, were real people, and they really, really did endure those events that took place that day.
Yeah. So, I mean, we should talk about that because we mentioned Lucky Larry, but these people that lost their lives weren't lucky, and their families lost them, and their lives were forever changed. And all the military that then would go to war for decades and lose their lives or suffer just the horrors of war and have to come back afterwards. These people aren't lucky.
That is very true, and we definitely want to be empathetic with that, and that's why I think we do want to think back on the events of September 11th, but perhaps, again, just with opportunity and ability to discuss these things and determine how much we believe the official narrative versus the potential unofficial theories that are out there. But yes, still definitely give a remembrance to those people that were either hurt or killed during these events.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's good to talk about, one, just critically thinking about what are the other options, but not being critical for the sake of being critical. I think, and just being mean and not wanting to trust people, but just saying, hey, does this make sense? And not just being willing to believe everything that is said to us, doing our research and using our brains to think about this instead of just letting anyone and everyone say something that makes us sway back and forth.
Precisely. So this is something that we've been a little bit all over the place in this episode. So perhaps not as organized as other things, but I think that having these discussions does help us organize our thoughts around what we actually think and believe, as well as what we see within a variety of sources of media and reports and things of that nature. And through these conversations, we can come to either better conclusions, or we can refine our conclusions or completely change them altogether.
Yeah.
And to your point, this is just one of the things that may be in that conspiracy themed realm. So if you have enjoyed this episode, feel free to like and share it with others and give us some feedback. Maybe we will do some other conspiracy related topics. There's many, I think, that are in more recent history, but you could go back even further in history to talk about a number of different conspiracy theories, such as pyramids, who built them? Was there a global flood and catastrophe? Was there people that stole the body of Jesus? And in more recent history, right, there's a lot that come to mind: the JFK assassination, the Trump assassination, events related to the Las Vegas shooting, COVID-19. So there's a number of just right off the top of my head that I can think of that may be of interest to our listeners. You can let us know.
Yeah, sounds great. That would be fun.
So, from your friends at I Hate Talking, until next time, remember, it is only through talking that we begin the journey to understanding.